I'm going to kind of give you guys an insight into how I look at things. So I went to North Bennett Street School in Boston 30 years ago to study historic preservation. My career, like studying the way things used to be built, okay, and historic precedent, right? That's kind of a big deal for us. And then I learned about classicism, which is why I've got these posters up here. And classicism is the old way of building. It's the lost art of building. And so as we think about scale and proportion and moldings, as we think about how things should be built, you know, what size should my base be? There is a relationship with all that, and it goes back to the way the Greeks and Romans used to build. I guess kind of big picture, as you put moldings in a room, I want you to kind of think about some conceptual things. One is that it's a language that communicates, okay? It was always designed to be a something that you could read, okay? And what that means is if the moldings get too crowded or the moldings are, you know, undefinable, right? You walk up to it and you go, what is going on up there with that crown? That means that you can't read it, okay? And if you stand back from a room and you go, if you've been in an historic house, you kind of go, gosh, I don't know why I like this, but I like this. That's kind of that's captured, that room is then captured all of the ideas and concepts of human scale and proportion that makes us feel good in those spaces. So the Greeks and the Romans, when they were designing their buildings, okay, they had gender. Probably can't talk about that these days, but there is gender in styles, and so there is what's called the Tuscan order, there's the Ionic order, and then there's the Corinthian order, okay? And all of those are based on a different set of scales, okay? And so the Ionic order was a masculine order. What does that mean? If I measure my foot, it's like 11 inches long, I'm 76 inches tall, okay? I'm like 1 to 7, right? Basically, 1 inch from being perfect. I'm 1 to 7, okay? The Tuscan order and the Doric order were set up with a proportion of 1 to 7, okay? And that 1 is the diameter, okay, my foot, 7 times tall, okay? So, you know, just like a small version of me would have small hands, small head, small ears, everything else, the full scale version of me, right, has, you know, naturally scaled and sized proportions of my body that all look, you know, close to right? And so one of the main concepts I want you guys to take away is that as your room size changes, okay, this is an 8-foot room, 9-foot room, 10-foot room, okay? So I have printed out the Tuscan order in 3 sizes, okay? 8, 9, and 10 foot, okay? So those, what you should see is that, you know, the column size changes as the room changes, okay? So you're not putting the same moldings in a 10-foot house that you are putting in an 8-foot house, okay? Those things change, just like my body changes and all the parts and pieces relate. That's how it was set up, okay? So it's a language. Second thing is that there's hierarchy. I don't want you putting all the moldings in the world all over the house, okay? I want you to, there should be a major awesome entry or library or dining room or something that's really elevated, hierarchy, and there's other rooms, there's closets and you know, kids' bedrooms and stuff that you're not elevating, right? So there's hierarchy in this thing, and we're gonna talk about that as we put this together. And then this human scale, which is what I was talking about just a second ago. So the Ionic order is a 1 to 8 proportion, okay, and the Corinthian order is like a 1 to 9, 1 to 10. So the Ionic was based on a female body, and the Corinthian was based on a young girl. And so there is a personality to those things. Going back to that language, there is a you know, an elevation of ornamentation that's different. And so the Tuscan order is, you don't see any ornamentation here, okay? It is meant to be this masculine, strong, you know, bold order. And so that's how it's put out. The other thing I want you to see is that there is a proportional relationship, like I was talking about with my hands, my feet, my ears, everything. that all the parts and pieces of this order are related to one another. So if you look at, I'll just go back and forth between these two slides, but if you look at the breakout of this Tuscan order, you'll see that all of these dimensions are based on D, okay? Base is 1/2 D. What does that mean, okay? D is the diameter, and so once you understand the diameter, you can actually measure and scale all the moldings that you want in a room. So if you're doing an 8-foot house, how tall should my base be? The math is there. Now, hopefully you're gonna get good enough at it where you're not gonna need your calculator to figure out what size your base is, but there are, hopefully what this talk is gonna do too is gonna help you kind of think through, the size and the scales of moldings and what they should look like and how they should work. But the base is 1/2 D. Everything's related to that diameter, that width, okay? 1/16 D, 7/6 D, right? And so all these parts and pieces. Now, the other thing is that this system, okay, and the way historic houses were built was that all the moldings that we use in a house are based on this classical system, okay? You're gonna laugh at me, but the chair rail is not that high, but it's based on the cap of the pedestal, okay? The base comes from there. Your architrave, that's your door and window casing, comes from here. Your cornice and your crown, and notice that that's kind of a funky crown. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you how to do that. And so all these parts and pieces that we use today, even the picture rail that goes across the top, that's based on this tinea, this top of the architrave. And so all the moldings we use today are based on this system, okay? So when I have over as a rule over here, chair rail is not 36 inches, okay? It's because the classical system shows us that it's not there, and we'll talk about that when we break out the 8-foot room. So there's a ton of information here, okay? And so I want you to kind of, this is going to be drinking from a fire hose a little bit, because when I first started understanding the classical system 10 years ago, I started trying to put together, it's very complicated. And it's complicated because all we're going to deal with is the Tuscan order today, but when you get into the Ionic order, there's different proportions and different scales. Just remember, big picture, that all these things are related, okay? And all the parts and pieces are related. So what I thought I'd do is, may come back to this, but kind of the point of this talk is that I want us to show how to break out these rooms. Now, because I've got this broken out, okay, I can actually, if you wanted to print these out, right, you could actually measure your moldings and kind of figure out what your door, window, casings, bases should be. What does that mean? Okay, architrave, okay, I said that's the door and the window casings. Architrave is chief arca beam, okay? And so this is the molding that spans an opening. That's why over doors and windows, this is why it's called an architrave. And it was called an architrave all the way up into the 1890 pattern books, okay? But if I measure this is about 3 3/4, okay? There's your door and window casing for an 8-foot room, okay? Is around 3 1/4, okay? Now look, that doesn't mean, if I measured the Ionic order, it'd be a little bit different, and I'm giving you ability to play around, but I don't want it at 2 1/4, right? And I don't want something really small around an opening, because there's this idea called punctuation, okay? And moldings are supposed to punctuate an opening. You look at that door back there, there's no trim around that door, okay? It goes away, it disappears. Punctuation is that there's a relationship in the width of the door opening that our moldings punctuate, okay, that our moldings, exclaim, okay, and so they define and help us read that opening. So there's your architrave. We did our base, without the cap, it's right around 4 inches. My cornice, my crown, it's actually a little bit bigger, it's around 5 inches, right? So now you're starting to kind of put together the parts and pieces. Notice this architrave here is what, 3 5/8, something like that. Over here, it's 4 3/8, and over here, in a 10-foot room, it's almost 5 inches, right? So our moldings are changing as the room size changes. Our moldings are growing as the scale of the room goes. Okay, so if you tried to use a 3.5-inch molding in a 10-foot room, it might look a little bit diminished, okay? And so that doesn't work quite as well. Now, what I thought we'd do is just start with the 9-foot room, because an 8-foot room in a classical space is hard. So I'm gonna just pull this over. I'm gonna start talking about a 9-foot room, okay? So I cut one before, a door casing. I'll start kind of here in the middle, because I'm going to show you how these are going to grow later on. So I've got, there's my door casing, right? I've established that dimension. This is 4.5 inch. I am using the Kuiken Greek Revival thing. And if you look at this catalog later, that classical molding catalog, this is a catalog that I helped design, okay? What was it based on? It's based on historic precedent. So Georgian is based on Georgian shapes, Federal is based on Federal shapes. This is Greek Revival. I think the Greek Revival works and is good because it tends to be a little bit modern and contemporary. Those lines are really sharp and clean, okay? And so, just real quick, these are the moldings we're using, right? There's 3.5, there's 4.5, there's 5.5, and the scale of these is going to change, right, as we go from room to room. Now, basically, if I wanted to, right, my base in this thing is 5 inches. So what I did was I just took the Greek Revival base and I ripped it down, right? I don't want it to get too tall here. And so I'm down in that 5-inch range. If you look at the original size of this base, it's pretty tall. And both for the 10-foot room and this room, right, there's the actual size. I ripped it down yesterday when I was prepping for this thing. Now, you might say, well, 2 inches, does that really make it? No, okay, it's not, I'm not sitting here saying, you have to rip it down to, you know, I'm not saying that at all, but I am wanting you guys to start looking at these moldings proportionally, okay? And notice what's happening here. I've got a base about 5.5 or 5. My casing is about 4.5. It's all kind of relative. They all start working together. Now, if I think about my 9-foot room, okay, look what's happened proportionally as far as if you just try to project these lines across this room. My ceiling height's right here at 9 feet, okay? So if I'm over here, I've got about 2 feet above my door, okay? And what I wanted to do is show you kind of how to elevate a door. And we'll talk about, well, let me start with the chair rail first. If I measured my pedestal cap, which is supposed to be my chair rail, in this thing, it's right around 3 1/4, right? So I could literally just pick up this molding right here, this 3.5-inch casing in the same style and run it across here as my chair rail, okay? Now, as far as height goes, the classical system has me down at, 22.5 inches, okay? I'm not gonna put it at 22.5. What am I gonna do? How am I gonna determine how high my chair rail is? Well, if this is a traditional house, okay, and your architect's good, most likely your window sill height is around 30 or 32, okay? I'm going to try to unify the room with moldings, okay? So there's one thing about the scale and the proportion, but the other thing is it should tie the room together. It should help the room make sense. So most likely what I would do is I would come in here, find the other things that are going on in the room, right? If my room, if I got a window like that, right, I'm not tying it into kind of anything else, but I'm in this range and I am roughly this size. You can also take one of these bigger ones and rip it down as well. So, take this one so you don't have as many steps and be, kind of right in that 2 3/4 range and just rip this off and have a pretty good chair rail. The chair rail doesn't have to be this classical shape. I've got this molding in here which comes from the Georgian collection with the just simple beaded thing. And if I wanted to be simpler, right, and I just wanted to put something across at that height, I could pick something like this. What it does to me, guys, is this, what's happening here is that there's punctuation happening here as well. Punctuation is usually about a 1 to 5 relationship. And if I measured my height of my pedestal versus the rest of the room, it's about a 1 to 5 relationship. If I draw that pedestal line down here, right, and then look what's happening to all my ceiling. I've got a really tall ceiling that's going to lift my eyes. It's going to make the room feel taller than it is. The problem I have with putting the chair rail up at 36 is it cuts it into thirds, and in an 8-foot room it cuts it in half, and so you're messing up the proportions, and you're messing up this vertical height that if this chair rail is low, it's going to ground the room, and then my eyes are going to be lifted up. And so there is you start cutting it in half, and you start making it into a horizontal space. Now, if you look at, like if I was going to draw you a traditional window, and this all changes, but my window panes are typically vertical rectangles, kind of turned up. If you look at a modern window, it looks like this, okay? It's very horizontal, okay? And basically after World War II, things shift towards the modern away from the traditional. And so reason why ranch style rooms in modern houses sometimes are low and long and the windows are shaped this way is that horizontal proportion is turned on its side. It's very linear. Now Frank Lloyd Wright was doing that in the 1900s, but he was kind of ahead of his time. The same thing is happening here. Is I don't want to, in this space, pull this chair rail up where I have this long rectangle this way, and it foreshortens the room. I'm going to bring it down so my eye is lifted up. So I'm playing with a rectangular proportion to kind of lift up. The other thing I can do here is I can elevate this this doorway, okay? And we're going to think about crowns. We're going to think about how that hierarchy in this room works. But this whole thing is called an entablature, okay? There's an architrave, a frieze, and a cornice. Now, if you guys want to design good mantles, understanding this architrave is a huge deal. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mini entablature over this door. Now, first thing's the architrave, which is what I've got. So I've got a door and window casing that's going to wrap around the room. Now I need a frieze, okay? Now I've cut my frieze a little bit short so that I get a little line and a little bit of a definition change there. Now, I'm going to now build my cornice. So I've done the first two parts. That's easy, right? I've got my architrave and I got my frieze. I'm now going to build up a cornice. And I made this yesterday, but it's an effective tool for helping us figure out how to make this. Now, essentially what's happening, if I have my architrave down here, right? There's my architrave. And then here's my frieze, which I just put on there. Now I've got a cornice. Now a cornice is made up of 3 parts. And I really don't want you guys using a single crown, right, to put on top of here, right? If I put this crown right here, right, and I'll just draw it out if I put it there. Right? You might say, well, proportionally, it's almost kind of the same size of those things, but this is going to be way too heavy and fat over this doorway, if you can see that there. And what I want to do is just like that, my architrave is broken up into parts, 1, 2, 3, right? This is my pause. We're going to talk about the pause in a second. I'm now going to break out my cornice by doing a small bed mold. I'm going to come across, put a corona, and then I'm going to do another crown on top of here. So I've broken that up. I've created that 3-part, definition in my parts and pieces, and I think I have a better looking cornice that looks proportional. So there's a couple ways to do this. I don't know if you guys are using this KB 349. I love this molding. It's a molding that that works both upside down and backwards, which is great. Now, look what's happening here. I'm about to put my bed mold on this door casing. I could drop it down like that. Does that look right? Like, it looks much better when I get a relationship between this architrave and this frieze that's a little bit tighter. So I'm probably going to be in this range right here, and I'm going to, right? I don't know if that's level, but I'm going to be up in that range, okay? The next part of what I'm doing is basically, there's going to be a molding that Kuiken provides that does this, okay? And all I've done is I've made this piece, okay? My bed mold's down here, my cymation's up here, and I've built this piece. That's what this is, okay? I've built a little box here that's going to go right on top of this right here, okay? It's going to stick out a little bit farther, about 3/4 on each, about 1.5 inches on each side, that then I'm going to stick my corona on top of it. I built the base for it. I've got this piece that will nail together. And what I'm looking at, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build a corona in here, okay? I didn't want to pull this down so it was too tight, but I wanted to build this out so, you know, it basically, you know, looks like this. And notice that I've got this proportion here with the bed mold, the corona, and the cymation that all complement each other. The same thing is true on the bottom here that I'm looking up at. I've got about 1.5 inches all the way around on the bottom. How's that look? So I have now elevated my door, okay? It's kind of crooked. You guys were supposed to help me out here. What the world? So now look at my height here. Now I've got, you know, what, about 16 inches-ish above that. What kind of crown do I put in here? Now, I'm not going to pull down this full entablature, okay? Because you could do that in a room. You can wrap that whole room in this full entablature, but I probably wouldn't do that until I get over to that 10-foot room, right? I probably wouldn't do that until I have the height so everything doesn't look crowded. And here's where you're playing with scale and proportion to not kind of overwhelm this. So I'm probably just playing with these moldings up here, and I'm going to do that depending on what room this is, with, I don't know, the fact that I've elevated a door, I probably would only elevate a door if we're off an entry, you know, going into a main part of the house. It would probably be wider than this, right? This is a pretty elevated door for a 32-inch door, right? So you probably wouldn't, you know, kick this up, but something that's wider, something that's inviting, like that doorway there, that's, you know, telling you to go that way, okay? One, they've got an exit sign, but there is this language that communicates should be, I know where to go when I stand into a room because the elevation of the moldings, right, tell you that that's an important spot and that's where you're going to be. If there's a closet, your closet's probably not even trimmed out, right? Your closet's probably, you know, you're certainly not going to want to elevate it. And this is where you're not, I mean, we've got 3 doors here, an exit door, a bathroom door, and this door out to that main lobby. This is the one we're highlighting, okay? And so maybe that one is a middle trim and that one's either none or no trim. But see, I'm thinking about this. I'm kind of thinking about how these moldings are going to go in here. Now, I could build up a full cornice crown, and I'll just do it real quick with these moldings that I pre-cut. So I've got this same Kuiken molding. I'm going to build this corona again. And I've got a bed mold, okay? We'll talk really quick about the function of moldings, okay? Moldings actually were designed to have purpose, okay? There's what's called terminating moldings and there's what's called supporting moldings, okay? So a supporting molding does this. Probably recognize that as a bed mold, okay? This shape right here is lifting up, it's supporting. And if I go up underneath it, I am holding it up, okay? Versus a terminating molding, which, like that, right? And so terminating molding, is a molding that does ta-da, okay? I'm finished, okay? I can't support anything over here. I've reached out too far. And so this is a terminating molding. So of these two moldings I've got right here, I've got a bed mold shape, right? Because that's going to be supporting, right? That's why a bed mold is always a supporting molding. And then you've got, and it will go right there. And I've got a terminating molding, right, that does this. And so I'm actually, supporting down here and I'm terminating up here. And so here is my full cornice. Now I would rather you guys, and again, where I set this bed mold, okay, will be, driven by the room. But I'm probably, if I've got a, 3-inch bed mold there, I probably want 3 inches here. And so and again, as we're talking about scale and proportion, right, I want you to start seeing that these moldings are roughly the same size, right? And that this gap and this gap are important pieces of that as well, so that there's a scale and proportion to all the moldings that we use. If I used a really teeny molding like this as my bed mold, right? I mean, it would look too small for what we're building here. And there's a relationship between all these moldings, so that when I've got this finished out, my base, my chair, my architrave, my crown all speak to one another. The other thing that's happening is that because, I'll just nail this together real quick. Notice what's happening too is I've got a little cornice right there, but these moldings are much bigger than that. Why? Because I'm not elevating a door header, okay? I'm elevating the room. This has got to wrap around the whole room. So my cimation here is bigger than this one, and my bed mold here is bigger than that one, right? All these parts and pieces are changing because the room's changing. And if you picked up these moldings and tried to define the room, they would just be a little bit small. There's some moldings that are out there that I don't want you using, like this crown, okay? This would be goofy in this house, okay? Now, I would much rather you, this is the size of molding historically that would go on the outside of a house. Okay, this would be, you got a 25-foot house, traditional house with a cornice that wraps around. This is what's there, okay? This doesn't belong in a 10-foot or 9-foot room. It's too big, okay? And this is all based on historic precedent, right? This is what, if you go back and measure those houses that were built in the 1760s or 1820s, they had moldings like this on the outside. So this is the most elevated, okay? So this is your if we're going to elevate this space, okay, what I would do is I'd probably do this cornice at the top, running around the room, and then if I wanted to elevate it some more, I might pick up that this base like this and come down the wall so that this becomes my frieze, okay, and my bed mold or my cornice is on top. Now, what I would try to do is I would try to find a relationship so that it didn't get crowded. And what that means is that if the total measurement of this thing coming down the wall is, 8 inches, and I've got, 16 inches, I might not put in as much of this base. I might do 4 inches of it, right? So that I'm playing with how crowded it's going to get right here. And depending on what else is going on in the room, if we're in that 10-foot room, maybe I'm doing a higher elevated cornice. But something smaller, about 8 inches in this room, because because this thing's coming down 8 inches and I've only got 16 inches, I've only got 8 inches between them, already it's feeling a little bit crowded to me. And so maybe I just take this cimation and then take this base and drop it down so I'm only coming down 6 inches in this room, right? So I'm hoping that you guys are playing with moldings and playing with these shapes and looking at them going, okay, well, that's going to be too big, that's going to be too small. And even though you don't understand the math, you also have eyes and you can go, yeah, that looks right. Okay, and trust your eyes, guys. Trust the skills that you've learned. Because here's the deal. I don't want us as builders, as craftsmen, to be installers, okay? I want us to understand the design that goes along with it. I want us to be better. I don't want you to wait for the order from the design team, right, to come over here to how to build a mantle or what size your molding should be. Realize that nobody, okay, architects, designers, homeowners especially, don't know what's going on, okay? They don't know what size molding should be. And if you can capture this kind of historic precedent, classical stuff, and explain to them, well, the proportions of the moldings, and you start having this conversation where you're talking about scale and proportion, you'll blow their minds because they don't know. And if you have a designer saying, we really want a big molding, we want a 12-inch molding base, okay? You know immediately she doesn't know what she's talking about, okay? And because unless it's a Victorian house, which hasn't a precedent for a tall base, there isn't a tradition of having a 12-inch base in a traditional house. And so you can go to them and just say, yeah, that's not really the way things should work. You got to do that better than I just did. But if the words coming out of your mouth can be wise and make sense, everybody's going to all of a sudden turn to you and go, okay, so what should we do, right? And that's where I want you guys. I want you guys having those conversations. And the whole reason that Kuiken, the classical molding, was built up, and the reason I have 3 different sizes of the Greek revival, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, is because rooms change, okay? And you don't have that, the moldings and proportions all change. All right, so an 8-foot room. And 8-foot rooms are hard, okay? Because unless you're dealing with a really old Georgian style house, which was a very early period house, 8-foot rooms are typically a modern space, okay? They're most typical in the ranch period and up until the 70s, right? And so my moldings have changed in size. The other thing that happens is that typically in a ranch style house, I live in a 1962 ranch house, okay? My living room, if you want to watch on YouTube about how to trim out a room, it's tough because they have windows like this, okay? They have picture wall windows that aren't traditional. You sometimes I have a window in my house that starts about right here, okay? I'm not going to put a chair rail down there, right? And so how do you unify the space in an 8-foot room? And look what's happening too. And we go back to this one. Right? Now, I've only got, if I put this is a 6/8 door, you know, I got maybe a foot there before I run out of room. And my recommendation in modern style houses is to have very few crowns, okay? Maybe one. And if there's oftentimes, because those houses you don't have formal living rooms and formal dining rooms as much, they tend to all be less hierarchical, okay? And so, you know, you don't have the elevation. And the quick thing on an 8-foot room is you really can't you can't do this this cornice and everything else in this room and look stupid, right? So if I did this, you know, that's going to be way too much in this room. So I am trying, most likely, to use, first of all, here's my base. Okay, it's been now cut down. You're going to see it versus this other one, right? I've got a 3.5-inch casing. I'm probably not using a chair rail in this ring, but if I did, it would be somewhere around this size, okay? And it'll be lower because I'm going to try to unify these spaces a little bit better. But to build that height I was talking about in that 9-foot room, I'm going to be down in this area, right? And as I said, the chair rail can be any molding. It can be any shape. It's just a line that you want that, and that's what moldings do, right? They create these lines, they create these spaces so that we end up reading this room and this wall differently. If I was going to try to elevate a room like this, or like a door header, right? I might put a big frieze on top, okay, just over this top, and tie my crown into it, okay? So that my eye lifts completely up and it sees the crown at the top. It might be like a small crown like this, okay? And it would just be over the doorway, and that might be how I just elevate this doorway. What's going to happen is, as it comes around here, it's going to return back and it's going to create this really pretty shadow line that's going to elevate this opening. But what happens is if I get my crown too big, and I hear designers talking about it, you end up with like a 2-inch space, and if this is white and this is brown, you end up with these brown lines that go around your room that mess up the look of it. So again, we're playing with molding sizes, we're playing with the scale of them so that the room reads right. So elevating the space, because we've got this cornice and crown, this is a great place to play with the exaggerated frieze. I think there's an example in this book. If you don't have this Kuiken book, there's an example on page 83 that takes a doorway and builds a panel over top of it and elevates it and ties it into that crown, okay? So realize that frieze, right, you're starting to play with the classical order. This can be, you know, really tall, and then you just have a very small crown, even something this size. I love that size crown in an 8-foot space, and because that's a Greek Revival shape, it's going to match and speak to the Greek Revival proportions and shapes on the casing and on the base. And all of a sudden, you know, if you're thinking about how to have all these moldings coordinate, when you start having similar shapes, the reason this Greek Revival package was built this way, it was so that all the parts and pieces would speak to one another. So if I can put my crown in, right, around in that space, and it has the same shapes and lines, all of a sudden it starts working. All of a sudden, and the designers love that, okay? The designers love that everything would kind of work together. But that's how I might elevate a door. You can kind of see how this molding, okay, especially compared to hopefully everybody can see, right? Basically the same height. Look how different they are, right? Look how they communicate differently. That this is much bolder and stronger. This is lighter and simpler, okay? And so I'm hoping you guys are catching the fact that how the size of moldings really changes how we perceive a space. What's happening in a 10-foot space is I do not think in a 10-foot space you really even have a 6/8 door, unless it's a closet door, okay? I just don't think I would do it. I think you're gonna run into problems. So I've framed this at a 7-foot opening, and you can get, again, if you had a hierarchy, where did I put my tape? If you had a hierarchy of moldings and a hierarchy in the room of how you're trying to put things together, that opening right there is probably right at about 8 feet, just over 8 feet. So now you stand in this space, you've got a cased opening at 8 foot, okay? You got an important door at 7 foot, and you got a closet door at 6 foot, or 6/8, right? And so I might have, okay, in this house, you know, this around the front door, because it's gonna be bigger, this around a closet door, and this around the other doors as you go through the house. I would not have this 5.5-inch casing, you know, everywhere, right? And so you're really balancing and talking to what the space is, okay? If it's a kid's bedroom, you might be more in this size or even that size than you are downstairs. Now, who's gonna know, okay? Well, one, the architect and designer are gonna know that you know what the hell you're talking about and that you've thought about this. If you go into historic houses, this is the precedent. This is how they do it, okay? And so they don't have those same casings everywhere. They don't have the same size moldings everywhere. And there are some rooms that get completely elevated with pilasters, right? Around the front room or in an entry hall, and no pilasters everywhere else, no wainscot everywhere else. And so I want these to be all parts and pieces that you're using and starting to, you know, unify and bring together. So again, now my look at my chair rail, it gets into, you know, 25 inches. I say that because I want you to, you know, if there's a couple rules you take away, one is that even in a 10-foot space, my pedestal isn't at 36 inches, okay? And so I think Gary Katz and I have talked about this. 28 to 32 inches is kind of a ideal pedestal height, ideal wainscot height, ideal chair rail height. You get too tall, especially when you get into an 8-foot space, and it just looks goofy, okay? So I get a lot of pushback on that. I did an article on Gary Katz's, you know, this is carpentry side, and got, no, that's wrong. What you do is you measure the back of the chair, and that really tells you where the chair rail is. Never in my 30 years have I ever measured someone's chair to figure out the chair rail height. It just, you know, I understand the concept. It wasn't even called a chair rail historically in the French and English period. It was called a dado or a surbase. So anyway, there's a rule. Now you're starting to see these lines as they run around a room. There's a molding called a picture molding, okay, that you could take a little molding like this, and if I'm trying to, you know, elevate a room, okay, and I don't want to put a lot of moldings in there, I believe that I could actually take these two moldings and develop better scale and proportion in a room than, you know, throwing up one of these monsters like this, okay? Because what's happening is there's this thing called a pause, okay? And that's what your freeze is right there. And when we talk about a language communicating, if I talk really fast and I didn't take it into break, you'd be like, wait, what's he saying? What's going on? There has to be a pause in between our conversations so that you guys wonder what I'm going to say next, right? And so using this molding right here, this is called, I told you that all the moldings that we use today come from this classical tradition. And if you've ever been in a Victorian house and the picture rail is, you know, 12 inches down the wall, right? Just sitting in the middle of the room, you're like, why did they put it there? They put it there because this is what that tinea at the top of the architrave is. And if you ran a molding in a 9-foot space, remember your door casings here about there, and then you had a single crown at the top, maybe in a, you know, just a less formal space, that would help you read that room better, okay? Because you're implying a cornice, you're implying a frieze, and you're implying this top of the architrave. And so hopefully the other thing you're going to learn from this is you can do more with less moldings. And if you have a client that says, I really want to show off, okay, Well, good, do that in one space, but when you go to the other spaces, make sure that there's proper scale and proportion, that it still communicates, that you walk into that space and you're not like, you know, what am I looking at? But there's a grace and a beauty there that works. All right, thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate it.